Hello. In today's podcast, I will be relating the immigration story of an immigrant from Guatemala to the United States of America and how that relates to the traditional themes and views experienced in American culture from the perspectives of an immigrant to the United States. This interview has been conducted with Carlos Olivas. I have approximately known Carlos for 15 years, as him and I have worked together for many years along with my family's property management company. He is the main maintenance technician for our company. A little background on my interview subject, Carlos. Carlos moved out here at about the age of 16 in 1982. He didn't come to the United States alone. He also came with his younger sister and one-year-old nephew. His story of crossing the border was one that was quite simple and didn't actually have any perils associated with it. He explained it as him, his sister, and nephew arriving in Mexico City from a plane from Guatemala. They then took a bus to Tijuana, from which then a van took them to South Central LA, where they had arranged to meet Carlos's father, where they would live for the next remainder of their. Here then Carlos describes the next little part of his assimilation into society with an excerpt from our interview.
I was a little disappointed because I came to the Central America neighborhood. I feel like I was still in Guatemala because everywhere I looked, there was only people from Salvador, Mexico, Guatemala. Hanging around MacArthur Park. And I was living in an apartment, really like a single apartment with 5 people living in there. And in Guatemala, I had my own house, my own bedrooms, 3-bedroom house. And, my friends. So I was here, I feel kind of weird for the first year.
Here, this relates to an idea represented in American Cultural Studies, An Introduction to American Culture by Neil Campbell. He states a quote by Bodnar about the immigrations and problems immigrants face. The quote is, "The point is that instead of linear progression, immigrants faced a continual dynamic between economy and society, between class and culture. It was in the swirl of this interaction and competition that ordinary individuals had to sort out options, listen to all the prophets, and arrive at decisions of their own. Inevitably, the result mixed." This relates to the idea that Carlos had to face when coming to America, where his differences were that he, in Guatemala, had a great house that he lived in with his own bedroom and kitchen and was in a good community that he felt safe. However, in transitioning to America, he had to face a different dynamic where his economic situation changed. He was now in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 other people sharing the same room. This was a completely difference in his perspective and lifestyle to that which he had faced in Guatemala. Another concept I found interesting was the relationship between being welcomed as an immigrant and receiving hostility. This is quoted in American Cultural Studies as well as Madan Sarup has put it, "When immigrants cross a boundary line, there is hostility and welcome. They are included and excluded in different ways." Carlos then goes to describe this in another excerpt from his interview.
The only thing that I came with my sister, she was a little bit of support. Because my dad, I never spent any time with my dad. He was like someone I didn't really know. Yeah.
This excerpt shows the difference between hostility and welcome that an immigrant can face returning to a new home and a new society, although the family might be somewhat familiar. His sister was a source of welcome for him and a sense of safety and comfort, someone he could relate to and confide in. However, he felt hostility from the community as well as from his own family and father. This is a viewpoint not commonly witnessed in the immigrant story, where the public is not necessarily the people that are inflicting the hostile message on the immigrant. However, but his own family is both the source of his comfort and welcome as well as his hostility. The next excerpt will show how Carlos then relates to his neighborhood and as Campbell states, in America, in particular, one must wrestle with the migrant experience, for it asserts, above all, that identity is not to do with being, but with becoming. Here is the following interview excerpt.
Things were starting to get a little better. I got a more steady job. And then, I started from there. So it was, by the years, everything was changing, learning, But I was still, I didn't feel like I was in America. It was more like I was hanging out around my own people,
Right.
or Spanish speaking around, I didn't have to learn, the language because everybody around me was only, Spanish speaking.
Okay. And so, everybody was just speaking Spanish.
Yeah, I have to. My customers, the hardware store that I was working for, they were all Spanish, from different countries, but still, Spanish speaking. So I didn't have to worry about, learning.
Here, the common theme is shown where the immigrant has to continually step into both his old life and his new life. Although Carlos, was now in America and was in a new community that was supposedly American, he was still dealing and conversing in Spanish the entire time. All of his customers were also Hispanic. Although they may not have been Guatemalan, his Latino culture or race, but maybe of Honduran descent, Costa Rican descent, Mexican descent, or any other Central or Latin American country, he still was speaking Spanish on a day-to-day basis with these people. Campbell also states, the transformative movement between worlds of desire, trepidation, hope, and fear. In the transformation, every step forward can be also a step back. The migrant is here and there. That goes to relate that him taking a step forward and reaching America, but then also seemingly possibly taking a step back as being in the same place where he is still speaking the same language and not dealing with Americans or speaking or needing to learn the English. This idea also relates to the danger of the single story and what the idea of a single story can create. For myself, my single story had been that people of South Central that lived there were mostly Mexicans and Latinos. However, when speaking to Carlos, I found out that that was completely a different story. It was mixed with a completely eclectic, diverse amount of races from different areas of Latin America and South America. In the next excerpt, I will also explain how Carlos had a view of what America was for him and how that danger of his single story affected his perspective on coming to America. Here is that following interview excerpt. What was it like? What most surprised you when you got here?
Most of the people around me were Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was, when my dad sent me some picture, I saw a nice house in the back.
Okay.
So I thought I was gonna be surrounded by white people, white girls, all nice. No, it was all trash, drugs. It was a mess.
Here we see that Carlos made a single story based on a photograph that his father had sent him, as well as viewings from other media that he had seen back in Guatemala about America. He believed that his story would be one of growing up in a suburban community with other children of different races, white, black, Asian, and Mexican, all the same. This single story also relates to the fact that judging a book by its cover is similar to creating a single story about a person. However, the story about a person is far worse. In the case for Carlos, he created a single story about what his perspective or scenario of coming to America would be like. This then in reality was completely different to what he came to realize as his reality. This relates to larger ideas of immigration and American culture based on the fact that the idea of one immigrating to America doesn't necessarily equate to one of prosperity and success. The ideal American dream, or what America is viewed or pictured as in media or conveyed through stories down through people, family, generations, isn't necessarily what the truth of America is. As I was able to see through my interview with Carlos, his view of America before he came and after was completely different. And it seemed as if coming to America did provide greater values for him and a greater opportunity to achieve higher success. However, that came with a cost as well of losing community and the simplicity of life that he was accustomed to growing up in Guatemala. The final conclusion I drew from this is a lot of times things are seen as the grass being greener on the other side. However, that necessarily isn't always the case. Many of the times one is presented with a view of the best or the worst of a certain cultural race or country. That then drives the single story perspective as well as the identity of that culture of people. The reason that this relates to larger ideas in the culture of America is because we then relate this single story to ourselves, the single story of what it means to be an American, as well as the single story of what it means to be an immigrant. This derivation of creating a single source story about someone is very harmful to both the person as well as to the person creating the single story, as you are drawing a conclusion about a book or a person based on what you have seen or the major beliefs about that race, not who or what the person truly is or what they stand for.